Well, welcome to another episode of the Gritty Hour. This is a little bit different. We're here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, on the battlefield, and we're right at the Virginia Memorial, right in the center of the Confederate line during the battle. And I'm joined here today with Professor Bob Pucci, who you've seen in previous podcasts.
Yes, good morning. Good morning.
And Mr. George Bauer.
Greetings.
Also, you've seen him in previous podcasts. He's my music man. Yes. So we're going to take a walk from the Confederate lines, which is where we're standing in the middle of, to the Union lines, which is way the heck over there.
By the monument.
Yes. And we'll join you in a second. Right. As Professor Pucci lights up his stogie before our walk. I'll tell you, I'll give you a little context. So the Confederate Army was here in southern Pennsylvania in hopes of defeating the Union Army piecemeal and then hopefully ending the war. That's what most of them thought when they came up here. One big battle will end the war. And he had attacked the Union lines, which is what you can see in the foreground, on July 1st and July 2nd of 1863, and it was not successful. So he decided to throw in the kitchen sink and attack the center on July 3rd, 1863. And that's where we're standing, from the line where the Confederate troops would have lined up for the march. And that's what we're going to do, walk across the field. Ready, boys?
Ready.
Let's make it happen.
So let us know when we're in range.
Well, I'll tell you the truth. This little pavement here, it's not the whole way.
I'm realizing that.
So how did you guys enjoy your weekend here in Gettysburg?
Oh, very much.
Very much. It was great. Georgie,
this was your first time?
First time?
And Professor Pucci, this was your first extended time?
Yes.
Yes.
I've been here for a day before.
We did go on a guided tour yesterday. It was very hot out, so luckily we were in an air-conditioned bus. That gave you a broad strokes of the battle, for the 3-day battle. And this is sort of a tradition I've had over the years coming here, is walking across Pickett's field and then vamoosing back to New York. So we're heading up to the spot where Lee went out to greet his troops as they retreated from this battle. George, you're getting your steps in today. And we'll join you there.
Absolutely. We'll have it done by noon.
So this is where we just came from, the Virginia Memorial that I just showed you in the beginning. And after about a 2-hour cannonade back and forth between the Confederates and the Union, if memory served, there was about 140 Confederate cannons lined up over here. And I think the Union had about 85 cannons on the other side firing back. The Union decided to pull some of their cannons off the ridge on their side, which made the Confederates think their cannons were effective. Even though they weren't, they overshot the Union lines for the most part. So General Longstreet acquiesced and had his troops line up. Where we're standing is where most of the Virginia troops lined up. And if you see that tree line in the foreground over there, the line stretched from beyond that all the way to Pickett's Buffet in the town. For just about as far as your eye can see down there. So it was about a mile long, the Confederate line. There's a bunch of different estimates, but somewhere between 12,000 and 15,000 troops. Pickett's division, by the way, did have the center where we're standing, but there were 2 other divisions as well. I don't know why it got to be called Pickett's Charge after all these years, but he was just one division among 3 that attacked the Union center. So with if you guys are ready,
We're ready.
we're going to start marching across this field. So as soon as the Confederates,
Do we let one go before we take off?
yeah, well, no, they're all out of ammo now.
Bob, did
Yeah.
you bring the ammo?
Well,
He brought a cigar. What else do you want? So as soon as they lined up, they started to receive cannon fire from the Union lines because they didn't take all their cannons away. So as far off in the distance, you can see those two hills. The one on the left is called Little Round Top, and the one to the right of that is called Big Round Top. They had cannons coming from there, cannons coming from the entire Union line, cannons coming from what's called Ziegler's Grove, Cemetery Hill on the left, and cannons coming from the actual cemetery on Cemetery Hill. So they were under an enormous cannon fire from where we're standing on. And then here we go.
And they would have been shooting those canisters, I would imagine.
No, you wouldn't have shot the canisters at this distance, no. The canisters, they were saved for when the Confederates got closer. So what I was trying to tell you fellas yesterday, you'll notice when you cross this line, they're marching in military formations, close ranks. You'll see that some of this land is undulating, so they weren't always in sight. If you can see ahead now, you could barely see the Union line. Transversely, they could barely see you if you're marching. But they would have been receiving cannon fire here, but no musket fire yet. The good people at the National Park Service always mow a trail for us, for people that want to march across this. It's very common that people march across this field. They visit Gettysburg. And what is it, 5 o'clock in the morning, George?
5 a.m.
Yeah.
Bright and early.
Yeah. It's actually, what is it, 8 o'clock in the morning?
It's about 8:15.
8:30? Yeah. Early enough, my friend.
Early enough. So when did the charge take place?
Charge took place, give or take, around 2 p.m.
On the 3rd.
on the 3rd, the last day of the battle. This was the last battle of the battle.
Okay, so this was the...
Except for a couple of cavalry skirmishes afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But I read somewhere that it was supposedly 94 degrees that day. The uniforms were wool. So these guys must have been pretty sweaty.
Including the underwear, right?
Including the underwear, yes.
Well, it's 72 and partly cloudy right now.
Yeah, it's very 2023-ish to go early in the morning before the sun comes up, full blast. So as I was saying, like from this point, you can't even see the Union line, and they can't even see you.
But they know you're coming.
Oh, they know you're coming. It was a hot, humid day, as I say, so all the smoke that came from that 2-hour cannonade back and forth caused a lot of smoke along the field here. So it was probably hard for either side to see each other anyway.
There was a diorama at the Gettysburg Antique Center that had a depiction of, I guess, a section of the battle. And they had used cotton balls stretched out to suggest the smoke. And there's almost as much smoke as there are figures in the diorama.
Yeah.
They used, is that the one where they used the like the cotton balls and stuff?
Yeah.
That's what he's saying, yeah.
For the smoke? Yeah.
We didn't get a chance to go to the cyclorama this weekend. We had too many things to do with too little time to do it.
Is this the Union?
Morning, men.
Good morning.
What's that house again there, Tom, coming up?
The Cavalry Barn.
Okay. Significance?
Well, the significance of it, I'll tell you when we get to it, is as the Virginia troops marched, where we're marching where the Virginia troops marched, but there were also a bunch of troops coming this way and a bunch of troops coming from this direction. So General Pickett's division is basically walking where we are, and that's where General Pickett watched the end of the attack from as they approached the Union lines, what was left of them, because they lost a hell of a lot of guys before they even got to that barn. But you know, you got to give them credit, they kept ranks, they closed ranks as the cannons were, you know, punching holes in their lines. But if we were here that day, there'd be a lot of guys strewn about where we're walking now. Now that got hit by cannons.
There's a piece of armor in a museum in France, and it's armor that belonged to the young Napoleonic soldier who was hit by a cannonball, and you can see the impression or the outline of the cannon, you know, in this armor. Must have hit him right in the chest.
Wow. The armor ain't gonna stop that. That Cavalry Farm barn became a hospital after right after today's, you know, the battle that we're walking on today. So it's a long way to walk while someone's shooting at you. It's a nice leisurely basically as soon as we get to the Emmitsburg Road, which we're coming up on now. If you see the fences,
So tell me
right
when
in
we're
front
in
of us.
Musket Ranch.
Well, it's a beautiful piece of America right here. Just the landscape of it. I should have said back there, so Lee instructed his generals to aim for this clump of trees that we're coming up to. That was supposed to be the visual focal point of what they were shooting for. Of course, you got to remember there was no monuments then. But otherwise, it's pretty much the same as it was that day. So we'll stop here for a second. I just want to show you from whence we came, which was the Virginia Memorial. That statue is where Lee watched this attack from, by the way, that position. So it was a pretty long march. I'm trying to remember, I know I read somewhere how long it took them to get here. For some reason I want to think around 15 minutes, but I could be wrong.
To get to this point?
Yeah, well, to get the march. Yeah, the whole march over, you know. The attack and the retreat was probably all within a half an hour. But it was 30 minutes of pure chaos. So if you can see that car off in the distance there, that's the Emmitsburg Road, which we're coming up to. And that also was a deciding factor on the Confederates not achieving victory here. Of course, a little forgotten piece of history was that they don't mention when they're talking about Pickett's charge is that there was a Union skirmish line out here that were taking pot shots at the Confederates as they were marching with muskets. Shoot and retreat.
Where were they?
Shoot and scoot.
Over here?
So they would have been near the Emmitsburg Road, which is where we're coming up to.
And what's the significance now of this fence, this marker that we're at?
Well, there was a a farm over there called the Bryant, I think it was called the Bryant Farm. I could be wrong about the name. That was contested. You can see the very foundation of it from here if you look over that fence line in the distance before the tree line. That was contested throughout the 3 days by the Union and the Confederates. And I can't remember if it was either the Union or the Confederates said, fuck this, we're burning it to the ground. So they burnt it to the ground. And I think that was the farm, the line of his farm.
Okay.
This fence. I could be wrong about that though. So if you could imagine what a mile-long troop line would have looked like after being shot at for the last 10-15 minutes, how many guys were left. Again, they were all trying to concentrate on what we're seeing directly ahead of us. So there was a lot less of them by the time they got to this point, but there was enough of them to get, some of them to get to the crest. So as we approach Emmitsburg Road, you can just imagine what the Union troops behind those rocks up there, triple checking that their rifle was loaded and ready to rock, you know. There was already injured guys streaming back to the Confederate lines by this point. Some of them may have been saying, "Oh yeah, I gotta get my shoes are untied." I'll be with you in a minute. Huh?
Did the cavalry have any function at this?
No, this was all infantry and artillery. Earlier in the day, right before this charge, there was a huge cavalry battle on the other side of Cemetery Hill, which is where we're approaching. It's now called East Cavalry Field. Between Jeb Stuart, the Confederate cavalry commander, and Union cavalry. Most notable was, tell him, Bob.
George Armstrong Custer.
Yes, one of his first commands, actually. And he was quoted as, he's the one attributed to coming up with the saying, "Come on, you Wolverines," during that charge over there. But that was right before this charge. And there was a huge battle on Cullips Hill in the morning of July 3rd. Which is one of the places we didn't get a chance to see this weekend. Where my grandfather's two uncles fought. 28th Pennsylvania. But right around noonish, everything was pretty quiet all over the battlefield. Basically both sides wondering, are they going to attack us? On the left, if you can see, that clump of buildings, that's what we've been comically referring to as Pickett's Buffet. Even though the American Battlefield Trust just purchased that building, they're not going to tear it down because in World War I, Eisenhower was stationed here, and this field was used for tank maneuver training. So it does have historical significance away from the Civil War. Of course, Eisenhower fell in love with Gettysburg when he was here, and bought a house here. Visited here during his presidency and lived here after his presidency till he died in the 60s.
He raised cattle, right?
He raised champion cattle.
There was no corn here during the battle.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, there was?
Yep. I think they're growing it to represent what it was like, although it wouldn't have been this high in July, I don't think, as it is in August. We're in August as we're walking. But we have the advantage of, you know, that good quality made in Taiwan polyester shirts. A rifle, I can't imagine what it would be like wearing a wool uniform with a knapsack. How much would a smooth, like say a smoothbore, for example, or an Enfield, how much would that weigh, Bob?
Probably about 10 to 15 pounds.
So if you were one of the lead elements of Pickett's division, say General Kemper was your commander, you're getting around here, the Union troops up the hill up there are locked and loaded, and they're ready to receive the command to open fire. Yeah, Park Service did let the corn grow. Maybe they have a harvest feast in September, October. What do you think?
Oh. Gettysburg corn, unless it's feed corn.
Oh, that's possible. That reminds me, we visited the cemetery yesterday. Very solemn place. And it should be remembered that thousands and thousands of horses were killed during this battle also. So as the Confederate troops got to right here, that's when the Union Army started opening up with muskets. So if I don't know if you can see with the sun in front of us, but that's all those monuments you see up there is the Union line, stretching from that bunch of trees over there all the way as far as the eye can see to the round tops that I pointed out earlier. So right around here, a lot of the Confederates stalled because most of this fence was up. Some of it was blown down by cannon, but most of it was up. They had to climb it to get over it, cross this road, and climb another fence to get over it. So someone, I think in the 1890s, had done a map of where bodies were located, and hundreds upon hundreds of them dead Confederates were right here where we're standing, because they were stopped by this fence. And that's exactly the time that the Union Army opened up with the rifle fire. So to answer your question, Bob, as they're climbing the fence and crossing this road and getting ready to climb this fence, that's when the Union Army switched, the Union artillery switched to canister fire. Canister is basically a tin can filled with iron balls for the most part, and it was sort of like a shotgun.
I know in the
most of the other, I'm sorry, go ahead, Bob.
the Revolutionary War, that when they use that technique, they like to fire at the hard ground so that the balls would bounce. And
It's exactly the way they did it here. I'm going to tell you about one artillery guy when we get up there. But you can see, by the time they got over this fence, what was 12 to 15,000 troops, what was left in this field was maybe a couple of thousand. As they keep marching up, you got to give them credit, they kept going. One of Pickett's generals, Brigade Commander Lewis Armstead, as he saw his troops faltering, as I think most troops would, being shot out by cannon and now musket as they're approaching this height, started faltering. And famously, he took his hat off his head, put it on his sword, and he said, "Virginians, follow me," or something to that effect. And he rallied them to go this last few yards to the top of this hill. in retrospect, and we all have the advantage of 20/20 hindsight, the Confederates had no chance right from the get-go. And you know, basically Lee, who was outmaneuvering Union generals for the last 2 years before that, was outmaneuvered by Meade this time. All records show that Meade anticipated he was going to attack the Union center, which is where we're coming up on. He had attacked the Union left on the 2nd and the Union right on the 2nd, and was repulsed for the most part. So Lee just assumed he'd be weak in the center. But the Union had the advantage of strong interior lines, which allowed them to maneuver troops around pretty quickly, and cannon.
And moving the cannon with, what is it, a team of 6 horses?
6 or 8. Yeah.
6 horses and 8 men.
Yeah, or 8 horses. Generally 8 men though, 8 to 10 men. So by the time the Confederates, what was left of them, got up this far, we're talking about hundreds left. The rest of them are either dead, wounded, or streaming back.
How many to start, roughly?
Somewhere between 12 and 15,000. So basically, if you're a Union man and this monument directly ahead of us, or this tree directly ahead of us, if you're standing there, it'd be quite the sight to see 12 to 15,000 Confederates coming at you. And human nature being what it is, you think every single one of them's coming right for you. The hundreds that are left at this point aren't walking at the space we're walking. They're basically double timing it. So the point from that second fence to here was a lot less than it took us to get it here. So by the time they got right around here, a group of Vermont troops, because all of the Confederates coming from that way were basically faltering, came out into this field here and started flanking the Confederates that was still going up the hill here. So they were being flanked on the left and the right. So by the time they got here, there was maybe 200 or 300 guys still in action. George, don't let my physical appearance fool you. I'm not in the best physical shape. So this is what's known as the angle. The 3 of us visited this from the other side yesterday. So here we are at the angle, which is the high watermark of the Confederacy. Managed to breach the wall, so they say. So we're going to climb these rocks into Union territory. We'll wrap it up on the other side. Most historians say this is the battle that led to the Appomattox. So basically the Confederates had no chance to win this war after this battle. But I wanted to tell you about Lewis Armstead, who I told you rallied his troops over the fence. He made it all the way to this point here, or give or take this point, where he was shot a couple of times, and he was injured right here. This is the marker. You can't see it with the sun shining on it, but it was basically a cannon here. So he got shot, leaned on a cannon, and then collapsed. He died about 2 or 3 days later, around the 5th or 6th of June. 5th or 6th of July. So all these monuments are all the Union troops that were manning the wall during the charge. 2nd Brigade. The monument indicates it was hand-to-hand combat here. No, not much cannon or musketry, but hand-to-hand fighting between the Union troops that were still here and the Confederates that came over the wall. So it must have been a pretty chaotic scene here. I just want to tell you one more story before I wrap this podcast up. one of the artillery commanders for the Union was a Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing, who was in charge of a battery of cannon. When he saw the Confederates coming out of the wood line to make the charge, he had moved one of his cannon right up to the wall. And during the charge, he was firing canister at them from that fence we just crossed all the way up to the top of the hill. He had gotten shot twice, because don't forget, even while they were jumping over that fence, they were firing back at the Union troops here. So he got shot twice, and was still firing. I think he got wounded in the shoulder and the upper leg. And as they climbed the wall, the Confederates, he got shot right in the neck, but he manned his cannon right to the end. He dropped dead right there, basically a few feet right in front of where I'm standing. And for years, decades, they were trying to, the officers and people in his hometown, which I think he was born in Michigan, if I'm not mistaken, and grew up in Hudson Valley, New York region. They were trying for decades to get him a Medal of Honor. The Medal of Honor was never given posthumously when it was first issued. It was first issued during the Civil War. But, you know, there were thousands of people who thought he earned it. And it wasn't until 2014 that Alonzo Cushing was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Obama. And that concludes our podcast. It was a little out of the ordinary for our regular podcast, but I highly recommend anybody who loves history to come out and see the Gettysburg battlefield. Of course, I gave you a very broad stroke of just Pickett's charge, but there's a humongous amount of other things that happened during the 3 days here. And if you ever liked history and want to get into the weeds already, but I forgot to say goodbye to Professor Bob Pucci. Worth of research to do. And George Michael Bauer. So I hope you enjoyed this. You guys coming back today. Probably back in my usual location. My loving brother, my loving older brother, hopefully has driven around somewhere around here to pick us up, so we don't have to walk back to Pickett'sfield. We're not retreaters, Bob.
No, we're not going to retreat.
All right, this time I'm really signing off. Thank you, folks, for joining us.